NSFW Redditors who live in small, secluded towns. What's the Rayleigh ducked up dark NSFW? Think that happened in your town that everybody knows about 10 years ago. A woman called 911 from the JC Penney parking lot claiming to had just given birth. She had a baby in her back seat in the umbilical cord and everything took her to the hospital, and it was obvious she had not just given birth. They found the real mother of the baby dead on a popular walking trail at a park in town. The woman had cut the baby out of the other's stomach and tried to pass it off as her own. As far as I know, the baby survived. There was a girl in my town who was paralyzed in a car accident from which she was able to sue and receive a large settlement. She hired a guy to manage the funds for her who embezzled the money. She found out, so he left a parcel gum on her doorstep disguised as a Christmas present, which she opened in. It held her instantly. She was a single mom as well, and I can't even imagine what her daughter has gone through. I grew up in a small town of about 2,000. It was a very conservative redneck logging town. There was a girl in high school who was known as the school salute. She was a grade ahead of me. She never seemed to actually date anyone yet. Everyone talked about how slutty and easy she was. I didn't find out until several years later that her dad had been arrested for molesting her and her younger sister. She didn't want to be known as the girl who got abused, so to cover the story, she spread rumors about herself being slutty. I know how much people talked about her behind her back, and I'm sure she knew it as well. It breaks my heart to know that she thought that was better than what she would get if they knew the truth. The judge was basically throwing all kids in juvie for pay. It was national news called Kids for Cash or Cash for Kids. Anyway, I went in front of this very judge when I was younger. He told me flat out the only reason I wasn't sent away was because I was signed up for them. Reams, he told me, you got 6 months till you graduate. Don't make trouble in my town ever again. To give you a sense of how corrupt he was, I only got caught driving 15 minutes after curfew. Can't get over the fact that parts of America have a ducking curfew. Land of the free. My area's small East Coast town. My mom broke up with her serious boyfriend and moved as kids to grandma's house. Less than a week later, the boyfriend had a coworker over to look at buying his stereo as he was trying to get his life in order and win my mom back. The coworker was secretly gay, hit on the boyfriend, and when the boyfriend politely declined, the coworker grabbed a maglite and beat him to death. Apparently he didn't want a secret getting out at work. I was maybe 6 and didn't find out what happened to him until I was 12, and a friend of the family slipped up and mentioned him being murdered while I was in earshot. I used to live in Street Joe. Amen. Everybody in the state knows what happened there, and I assumed lots beyond that it was national news. In 1989, 3 boys had a gun pulled on them by a man with a mask and told to face away. He picked one of them, Jacob Wetterling, and then Jacob was never seen alive again. Jacob's parents created the Wetterling Foundation to advocate for child safety. The federal 1994 Jacob Wetterling Act created the Sex Offender Registry in 2016 as part of a plea deal involving a single child pornography charge where he didn't get charged with the murder of Jacob, a man who is now in jail for 20 years with the option to hold him in a facility afterwards as a sexual predator. Told authorities where Jacob's body was a few days ago. Everything related to the case was released, and now local authorities and the FBI are arguing over why it took them so damn long. None of it would have saved Jacob, though Jacob was dead the day he was abducted. His meadow, her saying he panicked after seeing a police car go by in the 1980s. A group of friends who liked to get high in the woods held one of their own after he had stolen some of his PCP-36 star at wounds, eyes and chest. Doctor, the dude said that Satan had murdered the dude, not him. 2.5 weeks later, the kid was arrested. He hung himself in his cell 2 days later. If you want more info, Google Ricky Casa. Lady hilled a few guys on her farm and fed them to her pigs. They figured it out because she was still using their food stamp cards after they had been reported missing. She tried to petition the court to donate the pig meat to the local community center after the cops detected them for evidence. Judge denied the request. Of course, fun times. I once listened to someone get murdered right outside my window when I was 11. And living in a small town in New Hampshire, lots of screaming and banging. Then silence. I didn't know what to do. I was so young. Police were all over the place the next morning. Not a good time. My aunt saw someone dragging a body from one house to another when she was walking home from school. She ran home and instantly called her mom, who didn't believe her, but it came out in the news later that she was right. Not very secluded and only smallish 35k people at the time of the crime. The ducked up. Nevertheless, one day when the elementary school kids were let out of school and heading home, a woman lured an 8-year-old girl into her car with the promise of showing the girl her new puppy. The girl was reported missing, and security footage of the woman luring her was released, but no Amber Alert issued. There was a massive search for her. I remember seeing police helicopters hovering over the town and getting stopped by a blockade on the main street. They were handing out missing child's flyers to all of the vehicles passing through. Roughly 3 months later, girl's body was found in a wooded area 1.5 hours away. Police ended up discovering that a couple had worked together to lure her into their car and drove to a hardware store to buy a hammer and rope. The poor girl was sexually assaulted by the boyfriend and then killed with the hammer. It happened about 8 years ago, but the story's been making waves again because the girlfriend was transferred to a medium security healing lodge and people are pissed off about it. Popular siblings. He was a basketball player and she was a cheerleader. They were driving home together from an away game when he decided to race another car on a busy highway at night. He lost control and drove under the trailer of a semi that had pulled out the truck. I didn't realize the car was traveling over 90 miles per hour. Both kids would be headed in the accident. Right before Christmas last summer, the 19-year-old took his friend up in his dad's plane and crashed in a field. They weren't found 4 hours after the crash, and both were dead. He had coke and alcohol in his system and was just a student pilot. The dad had lost his wife in a freak accident on their property 9 months prior. Then his only son died. His house is for sale and he left the area. We live in a village with under 2,000 people, but a lot happens here. A newborn corpse was found in an abandoned van on the teen mom's property. People's firearms go off accidentally a lot. One guy cleaning his gun shot himself in the leg, and another out for a morning stroll with his wife dropped his gun and discharged, shooting her in the leg. My husband is a paramedic and there's never a dull moment here. Since Control F isn't finding anything, I'll go ahead and bring up the Ken McElroy case. Guy was an asshole that terrorized the town, having numerous instances of watching people from outside their houses as a way to intimidate them. Town got so fed up that they had a town meeting about what to do with him, knowing neighborhood watches and the like weren't going to do much. Hearing that he was at a bar close the town hall, they all made their way to where he was sitting in the car with his girlfriend, emotionally abused to think he was an alright man, completely convinced he was, and someone from the crowd had shot him dead. Despite all the witnesses, no one was willing to confess who was the one who shot him, and supposedly the secret has still been kept today. Knowing the kind of person he was, it's better left an unsolved mystery. The 6-year-old boy who lived in a farm on the edge of town and hung himself when he tried to climb over a fence with a toy guitar strapped across his chest, and the guitar strap got caught on a fence post and strangled him. I grew up in a washed up industrial and mining town in Pennsylvania, real dreary place. As I grew up, I noticed that my mother had seemed wary of the priests at our church, like wouldn't let me or my siblings get too friendly. Turns out that the big report on 6 abuse in the Catholic Church in PA featured a good few priests and bishops from my area, including the bishop who covered a lot of it up to Lynn as his name, and he basically shuffled the offenders around so people wouldn't take action. I was too young to really notice much, but in that particular case, it was clear that a lot of people knew Something was up. Two of the former state senators' kids who I went to school with used to have sex with their older sister. They bragged about it at school over a span of several years from about the third grade until we were in high school. I went back to the high school during my junior year of college to visit a favorite teacher, and I saw one of my classmates at the junior high next door, who was there to flirt with his girlfriend who was in the 8th grade. He did this in full view of the class teacher. He was at least 21 years old at the time. This was the late 90s, and that's one of the 100 reasons why people move out of the deep south and never want to come back. Garland, my small northern Utah hometown, was murdered by someone she met online. One night she just disappeared. Police searched for 6 months, eventually finding her remains buried among several different trenches at this dude's workplace. Guy got life without parole. Really rocked the town. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I was 10 at the time. Can't quite remember how many years ago this was, but there is a story of a woman who would swing on a swing in her backyard holding her baby while singing very loudly. I'm guessing loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. The weird thing about it was she would do it very late at night. One night a neighbor called the police due to a noise complaint, and when the police arrived, the police noticed the baby she was swinging with was dead. The baby had died and caused such mental trauma to the mother. She thought her baby was still alive or couldn't bear to come to terms with their death. A kid and his friend were robbing his grandmother's house, and she caught him, and he put an axe in her head and stole her car. He dropped the car off at a local bowling alley with all of the valuables showing in the car, hoping that someone else would steal the car. Not really secluded, but everyone in the area knows this story the town over from mine. Two young boys held a girl for her bike and threw her in a neighbor's garbage can. The parents searched for her for 2 days thinking she was live before one of the boys came clean or someone found her in the can. I can't remember which it was. She was only about 11 or 12 at the time, and it was really heartbreaking. Growing up in a small town, I used to always love seeing the mystery bear. Some guy painted his van to be an exact replica of the one from Scooby-Doo. Spotting it was always a highlight, but then years later, Red was in the news because apparently the guy was a child predator. The van was a gimmick to lure children. I was about 14 when I found about that, and I just remembered thinking that my small town was tainted. When I was a kid, the town drunk was best friends with the town's most connected lawyer. He got him off the hook so many times that I'm pretty sure the cops stopped bothering to arrest him for driving drunk. I'm amazed he never held anyone. Long story short, I got jumped by 3 dudes. One was a doctor's son, one was a pharmacy tech, one played basketball for a Christian league in France. Whenever he's not in town, they beat me with a metal chair into unconsciousness and beyond. I sustained around $6,000 worth of injuries, mostly around my face and head, and to miss work for a while anyway. Cops got called and actually stopped the car these dudes were in while they were covered in my blood and reeked of booze. But evidently the cops knew the guys, and according to reliable witness testimony, they just laughed about something and let them drive off. I tried to press charges against all these guys as my town is very small and everyone knew who they were, but being a small town, all the lawyers refused to represent me, claiming conflict of interest, thereby rendering these guys pretty much untouchable. I did end up going to court with them over it, but as I couldn't procure representation, I had to go through a mediator, and nothing happened to these dudes at all. My hometown is pretty small and in the middle of a cornfield. It's also right alongside the interstate, so it's fairly commonly traveled for people going between big cities, but the town is small, and everyone knows everyone's story. There seems to be one dramatic, tragic vehicular accident every year, typically involving school kids. One year there were multiple fatalities in a crash on the interstate at our exit, and the crash made national news as a bus was involved. We also made national news for having a testicle-eating fish pacu in our lake. Small farm town. 3 brothers went missing. Father said he sent them somewhere to protect them from their mother. Tried to hang himself, failed in Went to jail. I live near a relative of his. They thought he might have hid the bodies in the woods nearby. I had a rescue team searched my pond. It's been several years and still no sign of them. A while back, a little girl has just finished school and was walking home and was taken by a van man. Luckily, a parent was watching a girl and noticed that when she walked past the van, her feet disappeared and she never came out the other side, so she noted the registration plate and immediately called the police. The local policeman who responded was just about to finish his shift bit, as this was a priority and he was the closest officer. He followed the van. The policeman continues to follow the van for about an hour or so until he had backup, and eventually they managed to pull the van over. As the man was being arrested, the police officer opened the back doors and unhooded the girl in. It turned out to be his daughter. Music.